looking everywhere, that's how the story goes. Grab your gear, hold on tight, it's a wild ride ahead.
Long before the modern world, an emperor's guilt carved shadows deep into history. Emperor Ashoka, the conqueror who turned to peace, hid a secret so terrible it was buried beneath temples and scripture. A secret that should never have been unearthed. Centuries later, in the heart of monsoon-drenched India, archaeologists peel back the soil of forgotten ground. What begins as discovery soon twists into horror as an ancient plague awakens, a curse bound not by time, but by sorrow and blood. This is not just a story of survival. It is a story of love tested in fire, of choices between duty and desire, of the fragile thread between peace and destruction. When billionaire Rohan and historian Aisha uncover the lost tomb of General Veera, they find themselves thrust into a nightmare where crimson fungus spreads like wildfire, where the dead walk not for hunger, but for grief, and where the fate of the living world rests on a single choice. Can love endure when death itself rises? Can the mistakes of the past ever be redeemed? Or will the sins of emperors consume us all? You're about to witness an epic journey of temples collapsing under divine judgment, of villages lost to plague, of the ancient and the modern colliding in one final stand. Welcome to the Zombie Story Zone. If you crave history laced with horror, romance entangled with apocalypse, and endings that will leave you haunted, this is your home. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to stay with us through every terrifying chapter. More nightmares await, and this is just the beginning. Chapter 1. The Unearthing. The monsoon rain fell like liquid silver, hammering against the flimsy tarpaulin stretched above the excavation site. Lanterns flickered against the storm, casting long, restless shadows across the muddy trench where history itself was being clawed free from the earth. Dr. Aisha Verma, tall and striking in her rain-slick khakis that hugged her toned figure, knelt with trembling reverence. Her raven hair clung to her face as she brushed away the final layer of clay. What emerged was not a mere relic. It was an ornate sarcophagus, its golden surface glimmering despite the storm, carved with the sorrow of ancient wars. Her breath caught. "Rohan, we've found it," she whispered, her voice a blend of triumph and awe. Rohan Malhotra, her financier, and once her forbidden love, stepped into the canopy's glow. Impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, his presence exuded wealth and command, untouched by the muck around them. His eyes, however, were fixed on Aisha rather than the discovery. But they were not alone. 3 women stood with them, each drawn into this dangerous pursuit of immortality and secrets. Natasha Mera, a dazzling socialite and art historian, her silk scarf billowing in the storm, emerald eyes gleaming with intrigue. She was Rohan's current companion, yet her interest in the sarcophagus was far deeper than romance. Lena Kapoor, a brilliant linguist with a sculpted, statuesque figure and an elegance that turned mud into marble. Her delicate hands traced the ancient carvings, lips parting in hushed reverence as she deciphered the forgotten Brahmi script. Isabella Rossi, an Italian aristocrat and collector, draped in a crimson raincoat like a queen in exile. Her golden hair shimmered under the torchlight, her beauty tinged with danger, her smile one of a woman accustomed to bending fate to her will. Rohan broke the silence. "Is it him?" His question was aimed at Aisha, but his gaze lingered, burning. "The inscriptions." Aisha's torch illuminated the carvings of a fierce warrior, sorrow etched deep into the stone. They speak of a guardian of the final secret, a warrior entombed by Ashoka himself. Not a king, but a jailer, sealed with a cure that is also a curse. The storm howled like a warning, yet greed, ambition, and desire drowned out caution. Rohan's hired men pressed crowbars into the sarcophagus lid. With a screech of stone against stone, the seal of 2,000 years was broken. The air that escaped was not stale, but sweet, intoxicating, like crushed herbs mixed with iron. Inside lay a skeleton, yet unlike any they had ever seen. Its bones gleamed onyx black, untouched by decay. In its grasp was a small jewel-studded casket carved with serpentine patterns. Isabella's jeweled fingers hovered toward it. Natasha gasped. Lena murmured in Sanskrit, her voice trembling. Aisha reached forward, steady but pale. Then, from the edge of the forest, came a sound. Low. Wet. guttural. It was no storm echo, no beast of the jungle. It was hunger given voice. A scream tore through the camp, a guard's voice, ending in a wet, ripping silence. The curse of Ashoka's remorse had awoken, and it would not rest until it had feasted. Chapter 2. The First Bite. The night exploded into madness. What had begun as scholarly triumph now collapsed into a blood-soaked nightmare. From the tree line, shapes stumbled into the torchlight. Figures that were wrong. Impossibly wrong. Their skin hung in strips. Their movements were spasms of broken rhythm. Their eyes a ghostly white haze. The rain washed rivulets of crimson across their twisted mouths, the metallic tang of blood mingling with the storm. Rohan pulled Aisha sharply behind a stack of supply crates, shielding her with his body. His voice cracked with fury and disbelief. "What the hell are those things?" Gunfire cracked through the storm as his private guards fired in frantic bursts. The bullets sank into rotting flesh, spraying mud and gore, but the creatures did not fall. They staggered, relentless, moaning with hunger that was older than language itself. Natasha Mera, her emerald eyes wide with terror, clutched her diamond necklace as though it could protect her. "They aren't dying! Oh my God, they won't die!" Aisha's mind worked with frantic clarity, pulling from films, folklore, and nightmares. Her voice cut through the panic. "Headshots! Aim for the head!" One mercenary adjusted his aim. A clean shot to the temple snapped a creature's skull apart. It collapsed instantly, twitching in the mud. It worked, but there were too many. The camp dissolved into chaos. Screams drowned under snarls. The golden sarcophagus gleamed under flashes of lightning, a cruel reminder of what they had unleashed. Lena Kapoor, her silk blouse torn, her statuesque frame smeared with mud, dragged Isabella by the wrist. "Move! Now!" Isabella Rossi, her crimson raincoat flaring like spilled wine, stumbled into the downpour, her jeweled hands slick with rain and blood. Her beauty was untouched by fear, but her voice trembled. "They're not human. Dio mio, what have we awakened?" The group bolted toward the waiting SUVs, but survival came too late for some. Rohan's head of security, Vikram, a mountain of muscle and loyalty, was dragged screaming into the swarm. Two of the creatures sank their teeth into his throat, tearing feasting. His agonized roar gurgled into silence. Aisha's scream caught in her throat as Vikram convulsed, his eyes clouded into that same milky horror. In less than a breath, he rose, no longer a protector, but a predator, his once pristine white shirt blossoming with crimson. He lunged for them. The survivors slammed into the armored Land Rover, doors locking just as claws scraped across the glass. The windows shook with the pounding of undead fists. Hungry moans seeped through the steel like whispers from hell. Rohan gripped the wheel, his perfect composure shattered, his knuckles pale as bone. "What did we unleash, Aisha?" The storm rattled the vehicle. In her trembling hands, Aisha clutched the small casket she had torn from the Guardian's grip. Its serpentine carving seemed to pulse under the lightning, alive in her palm. Her eyes met his, hollow, haunted. "Not a cure," she whispered. Her voice was almost lost under the storm and the moans outside. Ashoka buried the source. This rewrite keeps the horror sharp, but I've layered in glamour and cinematic tension. Natasha's terrified elegance, Lena's strength and intellect in chaos, Isabella's dramatic beauty as a European aristocrat confronting horror, Rohan's collapse from billionaire control to primal fear. Aisha as the center, clutching the cursed casket. Chapter 3. The Glamorous Quarantine. New Delhi shimmered below like a jeweled tapestry, the skyline glowing with gold and sapphire lights. From the penthouse of the Malhotra Grand Hotel, the city looked invincible, a far cry from the rain-soaked carnage of Odisha. The suite was a palace in the sky. Velvet drapes, marble floors reflecting chandeliers, a grand piano gleaming under candlelight. Champagne sparkled in crystal flutes. For the world outside, it was another night of elite glamour. But within these gilded walls, shadows coiled. Rohan Malhotra stood at the floor-to-ceiling glass, whiskey swirling amber in his tumbler. His tailored tuxedo fit him like armor. "We're safe here, Aisha," he said, voice low, commanding. "The city is untouched. My team has the specimen under control." Aisha Verma, wrapped in a borrowed silk robe, felt like an exile in paradise. Her dark eyes carried the storm of Odisha, unsoftened by the golden glow around her. She could still hear the snarls, the tearing flesh. "Rohan, you didn't see them rise," This isn't something your labs can chain. The texts spoke of a plague of the soul. On the ivory sofa lounged Natasha Mera, dripping diamonds and danger, her emerald gown hugging her curves. She sipped champagne like nectar, green eyes flicking between Rohan and Aisha with simmering jealousy. "Darling, scientists always exaggerate," she purred, though her knuckles whitened on the glass. Near the grand piano, Leena Kapoor worked over parchments and a laptop, her silken sari a masterpiece of ivory and gold. Her scholarly grace radiated calm, yet her lips moved in hushed Sanskrit prayers. "Aisha is right," she whispered. "The casket is not a cure. It is a lock. And locks only exist because something inside must never escape." And by the balcony, her crimson silhouette striking as a wound against the city lights, Isabella Rossi exhaled smoke from a long cigarette holder. Her Italian lilt was velvet and venom. "Perhaps you fools are wrong. Perhaps this is destiny. Rome once dreamed of immortality. Why should India not claim it now?" Rohan's eyes gleamed more with possession than vision. He crossed to Aisha, fingertips brushing her arm with practiced intimacy. "You and I began this, Aisha. The cure, the curse. It's ours to control. Imagine the power, the ultimate weapon, or salvation, and together we will reign above it all." His lips claimed hers in a kiss heavy with memory, drowning her momentarily in old passion and luxury. The chandeliers seemed to flicker with heat. For a breath, the nightmare felt distant, consumed by velvet and firelight. Then, a piercing alarm split the illusion. Scarlet light strobed through the penthouse like blood pulsing through veins. The intercom erupted with static, then a terrified scream. "Mr. Malhotra! The lab! There's been a breach! The subject! It's active! It's..." The transmission dissolved into metal tearing, bones crunching, and a final wet silence. The music from the grand piano, left idly playing on auto, continued in eerie contrast. Soft, elegant notes undercut by the sound of horror reborn in the heart of New Delhi. The curse had followed them, and no wall of glass, no velvet, no diamonds could hold it back. This rewrite turns the chapter into a stage of glamour versus horror. Each woman, Natasha, Leena, Isabella, embodies a different response to the curse: jealousy, wisdom, and ambition. Rohan grows more dangerously obsessed, a man who thinks he can own a plague. Aisha remains the moral compass, but she's shaken by luxury and seduction. Chapter 4, The Fall of the Kingdom. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, yet what waited beyond was no lobby of polished marble and perfume, but a cathedral of carnage. The Malhotra Grand Atrium, once a monument of glass and chrome, now reeked of iron and rot. Crystal chandeliers swayed overhead, dripping red instead of light. Guests in sequined gowns staggered through blood-slick floors, their jewels catching the glow as if mocking the luxury that had birthed this ruin. Bellboys in torn uniforms shambled alongside them, their once pliant smiles now twisted into hungry snarls. Gunfire shattered the silence. Rohan's elite security detail formed a tight circle around the survivors, each headshot painting the glass walls in crimson blossoms. Their new leader, Priya Sen, a tall, grim-faced woman in tactical black with eyes like sharpened steel, barked above the chaos. "Garage! Now!" They surged forward. Natasha Mera, her emerald gown clinging like liquid fire, shrieked as a jeweled socialite lunged at her, pearls snapping as rotting fingers clawed her neckline. A guard's bullet saved her, but her champagne glass slipped from her trembling hand, shattering among shattered bodies. Leena Kapoor, drenched in rain and blood, whispered desperate Sanskrit mantras as she shoved Isabella behind her, using a broken champagne bottle as a weapon. Her scholar's grace was gone. Survival had stripped her down to raw courage. Isabella Rossi, her crimson raincoat flowing like a queen's cloak, fired a stolen pistol with aristocratic poise, her golden hair plastered to her face. "Even Rome never felt like this," she spat between shots, her accent thick with fear. Through the chaos, Aisha Verma glimpsed a nightmare that seared itself into her mind. A woman in a glittering sari feasting on the soft flesh of a bellboy's throat. Nearby, a billionaire in a tuxedo, half his face torn away, lurched at them with hunger where once there had been arrogance. And then, Rohan broke. His perfectly curated composure shattered. With a roar, he ripped a fire axe from its velvet casing and cleaved the businessman's skull in two, blood and jewels scattering together across the marble floor. He was no longer the billionaire prince of glass towers. He was an animal, teeth bared, hands drenched red. They were steps from the garage when the true cruelty of fate emerged. From the darkened doors of a conference room, a group of infected children stumbled forth, still clad in party clothes. Tiny tuxedos, frilled dresses, ribbons soaked in gore. Their milky eyes locked onto the survivors. The guards faltered, guns trembled. For a fatal heartbeat, no one could fire. The children swarmed, small hands tore at Kevlar, small teeth ripped through flesh. The air filled with the screams of hardened soldiers undone by innocence corrupted. "Leave them!" Rohan bellowed, seizing Aisha by the wrist. With a final heave, he slammed the reinforced garage doors, sealing their protectors, and the children with the horde. The screams cut off as gunfire dissolved into silence. In the hollow echo of the concrete garage, they collapsed against a bulletproof SUV, gasping for breath. Chandeliers no longer glittered. Luxury no longer mattered. Rohan's empire of glass and steel had fallen in minutes, reduced to screams and shadows. He turned to Aisha, his face pale, his pupils wide with a fear that no wealth could ever purchase away. "The casket," he rasped, chest heaving. "We still have it. It's all we have left." This rewrite gives Priya Sen, a new powerful female, leading with soldier's grit. Natasha, Lena, Isabella, each facing horror in their own glamorous way. Aisha, witnessing the grotesque fall of wealth. Rohan's transformation from suave billionaire into blood-soaked brute. The infected children as a chilling, cinematic gut punch. Chapter 5. A Whisper from the Past. The armored SUV roared through the burning streets of Delhi. Once a city of neon and promise, it now screamed like a dying empire. Skyscrapers glowed with fire, markets were overrun, and the wide boulevards had become rivers of blood and wreckage. Sirens wailed in the distance, sharp and fleeting, before being drowned in the chorus of snarls and human screams. Inside, fear clung to the survivors like perfume turned rancid. Aisha Verma sat rigid, the ancient casket clutched against her silk-clad chest. Its serpentine carvings seemed to pulse beneath her fingers. Her lips moved, whispering fragments of translation as her eyes scanned the archaic Prakrit script etched into its surface. "It isn't a cure," she breathed, her voice trembling. "It's a history, a warning." Rohan swerved violently to avoid a flaming bus that had jackknifed across the avenue. The SUV skidded, tires screaming. His knuckles were white on the wheel. "Tell me what it says, Aisha!" Her voice cracked, heavy with awe and dread. The warrior, his name was Veera. He wasn't a jailer. He was a volunteer. The cabin fell into silence, broken only by the distant moans outside. Even Natasha lowered her jeweled hand from her trembling lips. Aisha continued, her words weaving the past into the present. After the carnage of the Kalinga War, Ashoka was consumed with grief. A sage approached him with an elixir, promising to create soldiers who knew no fear, who could never fall. But it was a curse. It brought back the dead as ravenous husks. Her voice grew steadier, the history pouring through her as though Veera himself whispered in her ear. Ashoka ordered every drop destroyed, but one remained. Veera, his most loyal general, begged for it. His wife, his children, all lost in the war. He could not bear the silence of their absence. He wanted the strength to remain near them, even in death. Ashoka, broken with guilt, granted his wish, yet made it a punishment. Veera was entombed alive with the last vial, bound to guard it for eternity. His devotion, his grief, chained his soul to the curse. The SUV hit a body on the road with a sickening crunch. Natasha screamed, covering her ears. Rohan's voice cut through the chaos, low and shaken. So it was his love that kept it contained? Aisha's eyes glistened as she stroked the casket's surface. Yes, his love was stronger than the hunger. For 2,000 years, he held it at bay. But our greed, she looked at Rohan with scalding fury, is what set it free. Lena Kapoor, pale but resolute, leaned forward, her fingers trembling as they traced the inscriptions with Aisha. The texts say the elixir yearns to return to its source, the infected. She swallowed, her scholar's poise cracking. They're not just wandering, they're being drawn to him. In the back seat, Isabella Rossi lit another cigarette with shaking hands, her crimson lips curling in bitter fascination. Then this is no plague. It is a pilgrimage. Priya checked the magazine of her rifle, her jaw set like iron. If they're all heading to him, then we know where the war will end. The SUV sped on through the burning city, carrying not just survivors, but the weight of two empires, Ashoka's and Rohan's, colliding in fire and blood. This rewrite layers: mythic tragedy, Vera's sacrifice, love as both salvation and prison; female ensemble tension, Natasha fragile, Lena insightful, Isabella fatalistic, Priya pragmatic; Rowan's obsession versus Aisha's sorrow; Delhi itself transformed into a cinematic hellscape. Chapter 6: The Heart of the Horde. Days blurred into a nightmare journey. They navigated byways littered with wreckage and stalked by the shambling dead. Rohan's designer stubble became a full beard, his suit replaced by scavenged tactical gear. Aisha's academic poise hardened into a survivor's sharp vigilance. The glamour of their old lives was a distant, absurd memory. Their goal was clear: return to the source, to Vira's tomb. The ancient text suggested that only there, at the origin, could the elixir's hold be broken. The casket, they believed, was the key, but getting there meant heading directly into the storm. The horde was migrating, a relentless river of death flowing south, back towards Odisha. It was as if Vira's blackened bones were a magnet, pulling his grotesque children home. They were forced to abandon their vehicle at a choked river crossing. On foot, they moved through silent villages, the only signs of life being the flickering of zombies in the shadows. That night, they took shelter in a crumbling temple. The roof sagged under centuries of neglect, and broken idols lay scattered, their stone faces cracked, yet still gazing upon the mortals below. Gods of war, love, and death seemed to watch in eerie judgment, their shattered eyes reflecting the torchlight. Aisha felt the weight of their gaze, as if even the forgotten deities bore witness to this fragile union of flesh and fear. Huddled together for warmth, the fear of death shifted into something else, a desperate need for life. Rohan's hands, roughened by survival, cupped Aisha's face with unexpected gentleness. Their kiss was not one of luxury, but of shared trauma, a silent vow against despair. The statues loomed above them like mournful sentinels, bearing witness to love's last stand in a collapsing world. At dawn, the gods gave no answers. Dust motes danced in shafts of golden light as they stepped back into the silence of the ruined land. Outside, they found a working motorcycle, battered but alive with promise. Revving the engine, they joined the fringes of the horde, the noise swallowed by the endless moans of the dead. Two living souls rode into the heart of darkness, guided by a 2,000-year-old love story, and watched, perhaps, by gods who no longer interfered. Chapter 7: The Crimson Garden. The forest that once embraced the excavation site was gone. In its place sprawled a grotesque parody of life. Trees sagged beneath ropes of glistening entrails, their branches dripping as though they wept blood. The earth itself was no longer soil, but a living carpet of pulsing, fungal crimson, every heartbeat of it echoing through the ground like the rhythm of some colossal, diseased organ. This was no longer nature. It was infection given form, a garden grown from death. The horde thickened as they approached, a motionless congregation of infected standing in ranks, not snarling or biting, but silent, reverent. Their stillness was more terrifying than their violence. It was worship. And at the center of this macabre cathedral sat the throne, the stone dais where Vira's sarcophagus had once rested. His blackened skeleton still occupied it, upright as though in eternal command. Crimson fungus laced through his ribs like veins, burst from his eye sockets in flowering stalks, and curled outward in grotesque blossoms. Vira was no longer merely entombed. He was rooted, the dark seed of this terrible garden. Rohan killed the motorcycle's engine. Vert, the silence that followed pressed down like the weight of a tomb. Only the faint, wet squelch of the biomass broke it, a nauseating heartbeat beneath their boots. "My God," Rohan whispered, his voice cracking with awe and dread. Aisha slid off the bike, clutching the casket to her chest. Its weight seemed heavier here, vibrating faintly as though eager to leap from her grasp. The moment her foot touched the red-stained earth, the horde shifted as one. Hundreds of heads turned in perfect unison, milky eyes locking on the artifact. They did not advance. They simply waited. "The text said the elixir yearns to return," Aisha murmured, her fear giving way to grim resolve. "This is it. We have to give it back." She stepped forward, every movement feeling like sacrilege under the watching gaze of so many dead. Then a figure peeled itself from the congregation. His movements were jerky, broken, yet deliberate. Vikram, Rohan's former security chief. His body was mangled, skin sloughed from his jaw, but the Malhotra security insignia still clung stubbornly to his blood-stained lapel. His eyes, clouded and ruined, nevertheless held a spark of recognition, or perhaps obedience. He raised a trembling arm, bearing Aisha's path. Rohan froze. For a heartbeat, the past flashed before him. Vikram's loyalty, his banter, his sacrifices. Now he stood as Vera's sentinel, corrupted into a final, unwilling duty. "I'll handle this," Rohan said, his voice low, thick with grief and anger. His hand tightened on the kukri at his belt, the blade gleaming in the crimson light. He looked at Aisha one last time, his eyes raw, unguarded. "Finish it, no matter what." He lunged, slashing at the husk of the man who had once been his brother in arms, drawing him away from her path. Their struggle became a desperate ballet of steel and rot. Aisha drew a deep breath. The casket pulsed in her hands like a living heart. She forced herself forward, step by step, toward the skeletal throne of bone and blood, toward the ancient warrior who had been both prison and prisoner, love and curse. Chapter 8: The General's Choice. The fight was brutal and personal. Rohan was stronger, but Vikram felt no pain, his dead muscles driven by the ancient plague. They smashed into the pulsing biomass, tearing and grappling, the wet ground sucking at their feet. Rohan fought with a ferocity born of guilt and desperation, every blow fueled by the ghosts of the men he had lost. Aisha stepped closer to Vira. The air vibrated like a taut string, charged with sorrow so thick it pressed against her chest. The blackened skeleton on the dais radiated grief, a love curdled into an eternal curse. This was no monster. It was a monument to loss. She opened the casket. Inside, resting on faded velvet, lay not a vial of liquid, but a single petrified lotus, its petals black as midnight, veins glimmering faintly crimson. The final essence of the elixir, pulsing faintly like a fossilized heart. The words of the text echoed in her mind. The choice lies with the heart. To return the source is to offer peace. To destroy it is to unleash true oblivion. From the horde, 4 women broke away. They were villagers by their dress, lengas and colis of rough-woven cloth, now torn and blood-stained. Yet their beauty was startling, a wild glamour untouched by time. One wore scarlet, her anklets chiming faintly as she moved, a queenly grace in her ruined finery. Another, draped in indigo with silver bangles, carried the air of a bride, her plate still adorned with wilted jasmine. The third, in emerald, bore a nose ring of beaten brass, her movements sharp, defiant, even in death. The last, cloaked in saffron cloth, faded to ash, was delicate, her wide eyes almost childlike, her bangles clinking like faint echoes of a festival long ended. They circled Aisha slowly, not snarling but swaying in unison, like priestesses of some forgotten rite. Their milky eyes locked onto the lotus, reverent, accusing. Aisha felt as if they were embodiments of the very choice she faced. Love corrupted into hunger, or sacrifice for release. A thunderous crack made her turn. Rohan had finally severed Vikram's head, but another infected, a massive man with a rusted pickaxe in his chest, threw him to the ground. His blade was gone. He was driven to his knees, bellowing in defiance. The horde stirred, a single synchronized step forward. Vira's skull tilted, hollow sockets fixed on her. In her hands, the lotus throbbed with power. She had a choice. Seize it, command the cursed legion, save Rohan but bind the world to plague, or return it, ending everything. Love against duty. The present against the past. Chapter 9: The Emperor's Mercy. Rohan met her eyes from across the crimson clearing. His face was battered, streaked with mud and blood, but his gaze was steady. He saw the conflict written across Aisha's features, the petrified lotus trembling in her grasp. He understood what it meant. "Aisha, no!" he roared, as the infected giant raised a clawed hand to crush him. "Don't save me! End it!" His voice carried not fear, but conviction, an absolution. For once, the billionaire's cry was not of possession, not of power, but of sacrifice. He was giving her permission, choosing the world over himself. In that instant, stripped of all wealth and armor, Rohan Malhotra was more noble than any emperor. Tears blurred Aisha's vision. The village women had stepped closer now, their ruined lengas brushing the pulsing biomass. Scarlet, indigo, emerald, saffron, 4 spectral priestesses of beauty and decay. Their anklets chimed faintly, bangles clinked like echoes of forgotten festivals. Yet their eyes, milky and hollow, glistened with something almost human. It was as though they, too, awaited her judgment. Aisha raised the lotus, For a heartbeat, she imagined crushing it to her chest, wielding its power to save Rohan, to command the horde, to rewrite fate itself. The women swayed as if urging her forward, their ghastly elegance a vision of what desire without restraint could become. Her fingers tightened. She chose. With a cry from the depths of her soul, she crushed the lotus in her fist. The brittle petals disintegrated into a fine, black powder, sifting through her fingers like ash. A wave of energy burst outward, silent, invisible, absolute. The crimson fungus shriveled in an instant, collapsing into lifeless dust. The horde shuddered as one. Then, with eerie synchronicity, they fell. The giant above Rohan crumpled like a puppet with severed strings. All around, the infected bodies stilled. No more hunger, no more curse. The village women were the last to fall. They sank gracefully, anklets tinkling one final note, bangles splintering as their forms dissolved into dust. In their collapse, they looked like dancers at the end of a ritual, their wild beauty preserved even in death. On the dais, General Vira's black bones trembled. A sigh, soft as wind through ancient ruins, escaped the skeletal frame. Then, slowly, the warrior slumped forward, dissolving into powder. After 2 millennia, his burden was ended. His soul was free. Silence blanketed the clearing. The Crimson Garden was gone. The plague was over. Chapter 10. The Edict of Ashoka. Rohan staggered to his feet, his breath ragged, one hand clamped over the bleeding wound on his arm. The clearing, once a writhing nightmare of crimson biomass, was now a vast graveyard of ash and silence. The horde was gone. The curse had ended. He found Aisha kneeling at the foot of the dais. The empty casket rested in her lap, its carved lid open like a mouth that had finally released its secret. Her shoulders shook as she wept, not just for the warrior Vira, but for the villagers, for the fallen, for a world that had been forever changed. Rohan lowered himself beside her, ignoring the sting of his wound. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close. For the first time, there was no distance between them, no billionaire's pride, no scholar's restraint. They were simply 2 souls who had endured the darkness together. "You did it," he whispered into her hair, his voice breaking with relief. "We did," she corrected softly, lifting her tear-streaked face. "Your sacrifice, it was the key. Ashoka's lesson wasn't about hiding a weapon or wielding power. It was about mercy, about choosing peace over ambition. In the end, you understood that. And that's why we survived." Weeks later, the world limped forward, scarred but alive. The Delhi incident, as officials called it, became a global tragedy shrouded in mystery. Few ever knew of the lotus, of Vira, or of Ashoka's curse. Rohan, his fortune diminished by ruin, refused to rebuild his empire of glass towers. Instead, he turned what remained into foundations for recovery. Hospitals, food supplies, shelters. Aisha abandoned the ivory towers of academia to share her findings, not as a detached historian, but as a warning etched in human lives. Together, they carved out a quieter existence, away from the neon glamour of cities. Their love, forged in fire and tested by horror, was tempered now by humility and wisdom. On the site of Vira's tomb, where crimson once pulsed like a cancer, they raised a simple stone pillar. No name was carved upon it, only words. An edict as old as sorrow, as timeless as love. True conquest is not of land, nor of others, but of one's own darkness. The wind stirred through the forest, carrying the inscription into the world. And so, at last, the love story of Ashoka and his general found its peace. Epilogue. The Pillar of Ashes. The jungle had grown quiet again. Where once crimson tendrils had writhed, only the wind moved through the trees, whispering across the scarred earth. At the center of the clearing, a lone stone pillar stood against the horizon. Stark, unadorned, yet eternal. Travelers who stumbled upon it would pause, sensing something unspoken lingering in the air. They read the words carved into the stone. True conquest is not of land, nor of others, but of one's own darkness. Most never understood its origin. To them, it was just another forgotten relic in a land filled with ruins. But for those who knew the truth, for the survivors, for Rohan and Aisha, it was a beacon, a vow that the horrors of the past would never be repeated. The Delhi incident faded into rumor, a puzzle left unsolved in the archives of governments and universities. Yet whispers persisted, of an emperor's remorse, of a cursed tomb, of a night when the earth itself bled. Far from the chaos of cities, Rohan and Aisha built a life on the edge of obscurity. Their love was not the dazzling fire of youth, but a steady flame, one born of survival, of sacrifice, and of hard-earned peace. The world healed slowly, one scar at a time, while they tended their small corner of it with quiet devotion. But in the stillness of night, when the cicadas hushed and the jungle held its breath, there were moments, a flicker of movement in the shadows, the echo of a heartbeat beneath the soil that reminded them darkness never dies completely. It only sleeps, waiting for the next chapter of history to stir it awake. The pillar remained, watching, waiting.
In the shadows of the night, where the moonlight glows, the zombies lurking everywhere, that's how the story goes. Grab your gear, hold on tight, it's a wild ride.